Okay, so it's Tuesday, week 10. We're going to get started for today. So what are we doing today? By way of introduction, we're going to spend a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes, talking about SSL certificates. We talked a little bit about them last week. So we'll do a little walkthrough with SSL certificates, and then our main topic for today is file uploads. So this is one of the not very large minor requirements in your assignment. We need to look at how do we let users upload files to us and process those files in a PHP application. Okay, so we're going to do that today. So we'll basically build a few standalone pages just to see how the upload works, and then we'll integrate file uploading with images into our athletes application that we've been building out basically since week 2. Just to give you an idea of sort of our schedule for over the next few classes, what I think we are going to do, unless anybody has a big objection, because I'm not actually going to be here during the final week, during exam week, I'm going to be on college business. I'm going to be away actually in India. So what I think we're going to do is have our final exam on week 13 instead. Okay, so on week 14 we will not have class, but what I'm going to do instead is make that an open lab, and I'm going to give you some lab amnesty, meaning if you have labs you didn't complete, I will give you a chance to do any outstanding labs, not for full marks, but at least for part marks, and part marks is better than none. Okay. If you've completed and gotten 2.5% on 4 of your labs, you don't need to do the 5th one, really. There's no lab today, so we've done 3. So we're going to have a lab in class next week. We will have a lab in class on week 12 as well, so there'll be labs each of the next 2 weeks. I'm telling you that right now. And then week 13 will be the final exam. Okay, so in week 14 there is no class, but I'll give you that time. I know you have other midterms, other finals to study for, so you will already have this one done, and you can either take that time to study for your other exams, or you can also work on any labs that you've missed to pick up some extra marks. If there's anybody who has a problem with that and who really wants our exam during week 14, I can have a substitute come in here, but I figured it was probably better for me as well as better for you if we did our exam in week 13. Okay, so if anybody has a concern about that, you can feel free to come and talk to me or send me an email. I'm judging by some of the nods and smiles, most of you are okay with that plan. Okay, so
not that we have a choice.
Well, I mean, yeah, you do. If everybody had said we want that extra class in week 13 and we want to do the exam in week 14, and I could have somebody come in and supervise the exam, I can do that. That is a possibility. So, but I'm judging from people's faces and reactions that my plan is okay with most of you. Okay. So again, no lab this week, labs the next 2 weeks, and then your final exam is actually in 3 weeks. Okay.
When you say it like that, now it's scary.
That's the opposite.
Well, what we're going to do in 2 weeks, your lab 5, in a way, is going to be part of an exam, a review for the exam, doing the lab. Okay. So you'll want to be sure that you're here for that. Okay, so let's talk about SSL certificates. We talked a little bit about them last week when we were talking about requirements for building an e-commerce site. So, for example, if we look at this page, we can tell that this page is using an SSL certificate. How can we tell? There are a couple visual cues in the browser that indicate it's using an SSL certificate. So we see a lock here in the address bar. And we see HTTPS. S stands for secure. Okay. What does that HTTPS and that lock, what does it actually do?
It encrypts the whole board traffic.
Okay, that's right. So by default, all of the text that's sent over HTTP, so when we fill out a form and submit that data to the server, or we just click on a link and load a page, all of the text that comes from the server, it just gets sent as plain text from the web server to us. Which means that anybody who intercepts that traffic anywhere along the way between our internet service provider and the server, they've got access to look at all that data. So for loading a static web page, loading the kinds of things we've been doing in class, that doesn't really matter if I load, our login page from last week. you know, just to load this page, it's not that critical, but if I put in my login and submit it, the traffic goes from my IP here all the way out to the DreamHost server, so if anybody on the way grabs that, they're going to be able to see what I've entered. Okay? So the idea of an SSL certificate is it encrypts that text so that it, rather than plain text, if somebody intercepts it, they're going to have to decrypt it. Okay? So basically, pretty much any site, unless it's just a public site, if there's a control panel where somebody's going to log in, we probably should have an SSL certificate running on it. Okay, so it's not difficult to set up an SSL certificate, but there are a few steps involved in the process, and I'm going to show you how this works. Because if you're working on a web application where you figure it should be secured with an SSL certificate, it's going to be usually your responsibility as the developer to enable that process. Okay, so how does this process work? You know, we built this app with site, we realize we have a login, so we know that we're going to need an SSL certificate. So where do you get one, first of all? Where could you go? What kinds of places would sell you an SSL certificate?
There's this company called DigiCert.
Called?
DigiCert.
DigiCert, okay, we could look there and see what they charge. Anybody have an idea what an SSL certificate costs? Well, let's see what DigiCert is charging. Now, there's different levels of SSL certificates. So they have different, so these have 2048-bit encryption. They are $140. These would be US dollars a year. Okay. Now, you can get cheaper ones, so that's an option. Probably the cheapest certificates I have ever seen are here. So if you want a super cheap one, if we go in, let's look at the SSL certificates. We can see the different pricing, and you can see some of the different options that come with them. So let's go to the compare products.
But is it secure enough?
Okay, so you can get them for as low as $11 a year Canadian, okay? Now notice, you only get a 15-day refund. It's for one domain, and you have a very small warranty. You know, for 120, you get multiple subdomains. So maybe you have www.domain.com. You also have, you know, shop.admin.com. So that's what the wildcard means. Any subdomain names are still covered by that certificate. With the cheap ones, it's one single domain only. Okay, and then they've got some different levels. So you can look. These have come down in price greatly. The first time I bought an SSL certificate for a client, I think the cheapest I could find was $300 a year. Now keep in mind, this isn't your cost. This is something your client is going to have to pay. So if you're quoting to do a project and you find, and you in your quote you figure there's going to be any sort of private area and a control panel of the site, credit card payment, you want to make sure that you quote the cost of the SSL certificate, include that in your quote. So typically what I do is I'll buy these and I'll pay for it, but then I will invoice my customer and they'll pay me back. I'll also charge them for maybe an hour of my time to get one of these set up. Okay. Now many hosting companies offer SSL certificates as well. They're not going to offer them to you this cheaply. It's simpler if you do it through the hosting company. You can just buy it through them, and they do everything in terms of buying the certificate, setting it up on the server. So it's less work. It's typically a little bit more expensive. Okay. So if you want to buy a cheap one from a company like this, here's kind of the process. The first thing that you do is you go to the SSL certificate issuer and you have to buy the certificate. When you buy the certificate, it asks you for information about the website owner. So you don't put in your information, you put in information about the company or organization whose website will be using the certificate. So your client, in effect. So they'll want to know the name and address of the client. I'll kind of show you how this works. I've bought a number of them here. Until Ross showed me this, I was buying them here. Generally, they're $49. Okay. So I say I want to buy a certificate, and there's some back and forth between the certificate issuer and the hosting company, and you get to play the gopher running back and forth between them. Okay, so you can get them for 1, 2, or 3 years. They are not transferable between servers though. So typically I only buy them for 1 year, because if I have any problem on my host and I want to move the site to another host, I have to buy a brand new certificate. You can't transfer it from one server to another. Okay. So I say I'm going to buy one. So you put in your own information as the administrator. Okay. And then what happens here is you need what's called a certificate request from the host. So you have to figure out already where am I going to host this domain, or where is it already hosted if I'm going to keep it there. And you have to contact the hosting company and get a certificate request from them. So here's what that would look like. So this is generated on their web server. You can't do this yourself. You need to request this from the hosting company. So if I go into my old support tickets, we can probably find, I can show you what one of these looks like. So if I looked at my closed ticket, let's see, we can see this. So I've asked them, the host, for the certificate request. So these guys charge $75 for a year, and they say we need this information about the client. So the contact name, the organization name, and their location. So I gave them that. Where is the certificate request? I have them in here somewhere. So here's the certificate request. So they generate the certificate on the server, and you have to take that code, including the first line that says begin request and the last line that says end request, and you have to copy this and provide it in here to the certificate issuer. They need that code to generate a unique certificate to run on that domain and on that host. And then usually it takes an hour or two, and then you'll get an email from the certificate issuer saying your certificate's ready, click here to download it. So you download the certificate from the company that issues it, then you connect by FTP and you upload it to the web server. So I probably have an example here. If I log in, I can show you. So sometimes the certificate's one file, sometimes it's 2 files. I can probably find one here. Where would they be? So here are my 2 certificates. These 2 files. One is a PKCS and that's a PEM file. So those are the certificate files that I bought from Rapid SSL that include that request. Now those files are on the server so the hosting company can access them. And then I tell the hosting company, okay, I've uploaded the files, they're in this directory, can you guys go ahead now and install the certificate? And they responded. So this whole process took from the time I made the request. I made the request 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and they got back to me here. So they gave me the certificate request Wednesday evening, and I uploaded the files Thursday morning. So it took about a day. I mean, had I done it not 10 o'clock at night, it would have been done the same day. But it will take a few hours to do. So you don't have to do the back and forth if you just buy it through the company. So the last time I asked these guys for a certificate, they said, well, you can buy one from us. And I said, well, you charge $75. I can buy them from Rapid SSL for $49. So if I can buy it for you for $49, I'll get it from you, and then I don't have to go back and forth. And they said, sure, we'll do that. We'll give it to you for this. We'll match their price. So now, from now on, with this host, they'll do it for me for the same price as what I was paying. Okay? So it takes a little bit of back and forth. And then the certificate's set up, but your job isn't quite done yet. Okay? There's a couple additional things you need to do. So if I go to Blackboard, when we see the S, We know this page is running under the certificate. What happens if I delete the S from the URL and hit enter? Meaning I'm going to try to load this page, but I'm going to try to go around the security certificate. I want to try and load it in plain text and not encrypted. What do you expect will happen?
Might not load.
Might not load.
It's gonna go anyway.
Right? Any page that you want to run under the SSL certificate, you need to have a little check in the header that checks if HTTPS is on or off. And in PHP, in all scripting languages, there's a server variable that will tell you whether HTTPS is on or off. And if it's off, you need to use header location to redirect the user back to the HTTPS version. Otherwise, you've installed your certificate, but you're letting users go around it. Okay. The very first PHP file we made in this class, there's actually a value here. So here was our very first, no, that's not the one. PHP, let's see. Where's my test page? Maybe it's this one. So all of these variables, remember this was the very first page we did on week 1. We wrote this little PHP info function. In here, there's all kinds of variables about the server, and somewhere in here, here's all the server PHP variables, and in here, somewhere it should tell us if HTTPS is on or off. I just have to figure out where it is. I think it's in one of these, somewhere in this page. Yeah, I think I'll have to find it. Yes. John, you have an idea where it is?
Wouldn't a server request URI or remote added?
Yeah, that's true. We could. Well, request URI doesn't give us. Oh, hang on. I'm curious if I type it in. This page does of the SSL certificate, so let me try it here. Let's scroll down to the bottom. Here's the variable. Server HTTPS evaluates to on. So that's the value you need to check. Okay, and then you get all kinds of information. So you can check that value from the server collection, and HTTPS will have an on or off. So if it's off, you need to use header location to redirect the user to the same page, but make sure you put HTTPS at the front of the URL. The other thing you have to check, unless you buy one of these wildcard certificates, which are more expensive, you need to be very careful when you buy the certificate. So typically we want to buy the certificate to run at www. And then our domain name. Okay. So for example, I think I've got one here. Let me go here. So this page, most of the pages are public. There's no HTTPS until, as soon as we go into the register page, the HTTPS is on. Okay. If I try and take it off, I've got a script at the top that checks, that takes me back to the secured version, but the certificate is registered here, www. And then the domain name. I didn't buy a wildcard certificate, which means if I go here with HTTPS, what will happen is the user is going to get an error saying the site you're trying to visit doesn't match the security certificate, and they're going to get a big red X and a scary error message, and they're going to go running away screaming from the site. Okay. So not only do I have to check for HTTPS, I also have to check whether the user's gone to www or not. Because the rest of the pages I could go here without www, could just go here, and they'll work fine. Okay, there's no www in the name. But as soon as I go here, if I take that out, this is going to break my certificate and the user is going to get a warning saying the certificate doesn't match the domain I'm trying to load. So I've also done a check not only for HTTPS, I've also got a script checking that www is part of the URL, and if it's missing, I put it back in. Okay. So this is one of the tricks you have to make sure when you register. Not only do you register the certificate with www, but you have to make sure the site the user is loading that version of it. And if they don't, you have to put www dot back into the URL, or they're going to get a big error, which will frighten most users away. I'm not sure if I still have a sample of this. Yeah, here's what happens, right? It says you asked to connect securely here, so most people are just going to leave, right? So if I didn't put that little check with www on, this is what my users would get. Nobody's going to go in here. So that's a bit of a gotcha you got to make sure about. Okay, so
What happens if you couldn't get me out of here?
I don't know where it takes me.
Oh,
Just back here, right? You can say, so if I go to the details, right, see, so here, it does have a certificate, but the certificate, this site runs on Shopify, so the certificate is only valid if I typed in, so if I type in treasurenet.myshopify.com, it should work because the certificate's registered there, right? So that'll work, and it's HTTPS. But if I try and go this way, okay, you get that. So we have to be really careful when we buy the name. And if we're going to go to the trouble to buy the name, we may as well make sure that HTTPS is on and that we're forcing users into the name that matches our certificate. Okay. Probably, so it's not really a very complicated process. I'm sure many of you are going to wind up over the next little while having to do this and having to set one up. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? One other tip. If you buy the certificate, the expiry notices on the certificate are going to come to you. Typically, you'll get 3. You'll get 90 days, 60 days, 30 days. Don't ignore them. Because if you let your certificate expire, people are going to get that error message, right? If you let it expire and people click links that go to the HTTPS version, it's going to say the site's not secure, and the users are just going to leave. So make sure you renew the certificates before they expire. And again, I think I mentioned this already, but if you move a site from one server to another, you need to buy a new certificate. The certificate is specific to that server, and you can't transfer it. Okay.
If a certificate expires, can't you just reroute through HTTP?
Pardon?
Can't you just use regular HTTP instead of HTTPS
To do what?
if the certificate expires?
You can, but for example, you should have scripts in your site that direct the user to the HTTPS version. So the users are going to get taken, should be forced into the secured version. Well, if the certificate expires, then they're going to get a message saying the site's not secured. So you want to avoid that and make sure you renew it before they expire. Okay, so what are we building today? Ultimately, I'm just going to log in here. So what we want to build in here, ultimately what we want to be able to do is upload a photo and have that photo show up in here when we're looking at one user. So we're going to want to be able to copy images to the server, generate those files on the server, and then we're also going to add another link in here by the end of the class that will say gallery And it will look something sort of similar to this. I'm going to give you all a copy of all these images, and we'll look at uploading them. So we get both a small and a large of all of these. Okay? I tried to be cross-cultural here and hit every gender, ethnicity, sport as much as I could in my little 6 records. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wind up changing some of these so then I can upload the appropriate image. So I'm going to change the names of some of these. And I'll give you these images so you don't have to spend time on Google trying to find images. Okay, I've uploaded these to Blackboard. So what we're going to do first is we'll just build a basic upload page that's disconnected from our application first, just so we can go over the mechanics of how a file upload works in PHP. How do we let the user upload a file and save it on the server? Then we'll look at integrating that functionality into the application we already have running. Okay. So I'm going to make a lesson 10 folder for today. So let's think about, we can just make a quick note here. I'll go back into lesson 10. So let's talk about, before we start building anything or do any code, what things will we need to do in order to allow the user to upload a file? And for now, our upload, we're going to let the user upload any kind of file they want. We're not going to really filter.
You need to give input type equals file.
Okay, so we will need, and that has to go inside of what?
The form, the registration.
Okay, so we need to build a form that includes input type equals file, name equals something. So this is one of the only, I sort of said from week 1, HTML is dumb, doesn't really do anything. The input type equals file is one of the rare exceptions. Instead of just presenting or collecting data, it actually has some built-in functionality. What happens, what will the user see if we put that HTML on the page? What will they see and how does it behave?
You'll see a browse link.
Yeah, so it creates a browse link, and what happens when they click browse?
So browse to directories.
Yeah, it brings up a file dialog box on, regardless of their operating system, Linux, Windows, Mac. So it's got that intelligence baked right into it. We don't have to do anything, we just need to include that control and make sure we put it in a form. So we'll need that. What else will we need? So we have a file on our local computer and we want to use the browser to generate a copy of it on the server.
We need some file functions on page.
Yes, we will. We need one other thing on our form. Well, we will need a submit button, yes. Our form also will need a particular attribute. So add to the form tag the attribute. Anybody know what attribute we're going to need? We haven't used it before. John?
Multiple?
No, you're close. What we have to add is an encoding type attribute. Okay? We have to talk about how the files get copied for a minute. Okay? So I've got these images, right? I have a copy of this image on my computer. What I need to do is get a copy of this image to be created inside let me just rename that. I want an exact copy created here. Now we're not using FTP for this to transfer the file. So how, when I browse and upload, how does that file actually get copied from my local computer? Right, here's my local file. What's the actual process of how this JPEG file winds up with an exact copy on the server?
Probably only the directory goes there and then it refers back.
Good guess. Nope. We're not using FTP. What actually happens is this. When we copy it, our file, doesn't matter if it's a JPEG, a PDF, a Word document, an Excel file, a zip file, anything. So, you zip and upload your assignment to Blackboard. It's the same process. What happens is we first have to convert this file to binary code. So basically it's converted to ones and zeros. The ones and zeros can be posted through our form over to the server, and then the server basically decodes the ones and zeros back into the original file format. So the transfer from here to here through the browser is through binary code. In order for that to happen, we have to specify a certain attribute of our form tag. If we don't do this, it won't do the binary conversion. So what we need to add in our form tag is an encoding type. And we'll have to give it this value. John, this is where you were close. You said multi. This attribute will have to go in any form tag where we're letting users upload one or more files. Okay? If we don't include that attribute, we won't get an error, but our file just doesn't get copied to the server. It's like the file upload just doesn't exist. Okay? So we always have to remember to include this attribute on our form if we're going to let the users upload. So then we'll have to now do, as Yash said, we'll need some PHP processing. Okay? So what things might we do with that file? Or what information about that file might we have access to that we might want to know?
Check the extension if it's an image.
Okay. So we can check the file extension. Now, checking the extension is not perfect, right? Why not? Okay, yeah. What else is checking the extension not foolproof?
We can change the extension.
Right, because we could change the extension, right? I could go here, let's say I make a copy of this. Just paste that, right? I could do this, or I could do the reverse. I could take an executable file, give it a JPEG extension, and upload it, right? So it's not foolproof. There is actually a built-in function in PHP that will actually check the MIME content type. So it ignores the extension. It tells you the actual file type. That library is not installed on DreamHost, so we won't be able to use it. All we can really do for today is check the extension. Let's think about how, we can check how this works. Let's look at Facebook's photo gallery for a minute. We haven't seen Herb for a while. Okay. I'm curious, what do you think will happen if I try and upload this file to an image gallery? It is a JPEG, but it's got an executable extension.
There's a chance it might get rejected because it may treat it like a virus.
Yeah, let's see. I'm curious what it will do, right? So I'll pick my executable. Okay, so it actually knows. Although it didn't upload it. I don't see my photo. Let's try and put it in here.
I think it's because you said you didn't want to leave the page. You rejected it.
Oh, okay. So it, by default, is looking for all, but I can try. Okay, so there's my file. So it actually, Facebook's actually checking the real content type, it's not just checking the extension. So for our purposes, we're going to wind up checking the extension because that's the limit we have on DreamHost. To do our due diligence, we probably want to check the content type. So we can check what type of file it is. What other things could we check? So we want to check the extension. What else about that file might we want to know? Yeah, we might check the size, right? And sometimes that's a maximum. It could also be a minimum. One of my clients, they created photo GIFs where users had to upload their photos, so there was a maximum file size, but there was also a minimum, because if the file was too small, the image was too small, they couldn't print the item. Okay, so they had both a minimum and a maximum. There's one other thing we might want to check. So the extension, the size, could be, think about duplicates. John?
Check if the file already exists in the directory.
Okay, or so, and there's a few different ways we could do this.
You can only check by name and the name.
So we can check by name, or our other option is we can make sure we give every file a unique name. I prefer that rather than checking whether the name exists. We'll just put a unique identifier onto each name. So that way we know we're not overwriting any files. Okay, we'll look at what happens on DreamHost if we don't. Okay. Now with PHP, where do the files get uploaded to? On any server.
It gets stored in a temporary spot, and then you have to move it to the directory.
You got it. So with PHP, the server assigns a default cache spot for every single upload. Even if it's the same browser session and the same file being uploaded, each one goes to a different spot in cache. They don't stay there long. I think it's 15 or 20 minutes. And if we don't take the file out of cache and save it to where we want it to ultimately reside, that file gets deleted. So we have to copy from cache to a permanent directory. So this is the process we're going to go through. Okay. So what we want to do, we're going to build a basic form with just a simple upload and a simple browse and upload button. And then we're going to write the PHP code where we can check the type of file, we can check the size, we can name it and upload it to the server, and then if it's an image, we can display that image on the page. Okay, so we're not going to use our database for this part. We're going to look just at simply how the uploads work. So if you want to open up your code editor, please.
Do you store images in database or?
We'll come to that later. We're just going to deal with uploading first, and then we'll deal with the database later. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new PHP page. I'm not going to bother putting a header and footer on it. These will just be standalone pages. So I'm going to call this page, put it in my lesson 10 folder. I'm just going to call it upload file.php. There's no PHP code on here, so you could use an HTML or HTML extension. It doesn't matter. This is just going to be a basic form. I'm not going to bother with CSS or anything else on it. So I'll put in an input, and the input type we need is file. That will give us the browse button, which brings up the file dialog box. We have to give it a name. If we don't give it a name, we're not going to be able to refer to that file on the next page. Whoops, this should be input type equals submit. So just an upload, it's just a browse button, and a submit will look like this. Notice that input type equals file. It renders, it will look slightly different in different browsers. We'll look at it in all three browsers. It'll work the same way, but the visual representation of that input type equals file will vary slightly from Chrome to Firefox to Internet Explorer. And the other thing I need that I forgot is our form tag. So we're going to use post as our method. Our action will be save upload.php. And this is where we need that encoding type attribute. And we want multi-part form data. Whoops. And I need to move my end form tag down below my submit button. Otherwise, my form will never submit. Now, we can still put regular controls on the form, like text boxes and drop downs, and in fact, we'll do that because on our athlete page, we still will want our 3 text boxes for first name, last name, and email, but we're going to add an input type equals file at the bottom. So all the other controls will still reference using post, but the file will have to reference using a different collection. It's not considered part of the post collection. So there's all the HTML. So the only thing that's things that are new, that attribute we haven't used before, and we also haven't used this one. So let's upload this page to the server. Connect to DreamHost and upload it to a lesson 10 folder. So this is what it should look like in the browser. So in Firefox, the button says Browse and no file selected. Will look slightly different in Chrome's implementation. So in Internet Explorer, it looks like this. It looks like a text box, although I can't actually type in it. And Chrome's implementation looks like this, says no file chosen. So in any of them, the browse button will bring up my file dialog box, directory dialog box. So I could go ahead and browse to a file and click upload, but I'm going to get a 404, right? We don't have save upload yet. So let's do one other thing here. Here's my directory on the server. I want to create a subfolder inside of here, which is where we will store all of the uploads. So we're going to make a subfolder. Rather than putting the uploads in here where our PHP pages are, they're going to go in a separate folder, which is typical by convention. If we're letting users upload files, we keep the files uploaded by our users in a separate directory from all of our web pages. So I'm just going to right-click in here and create a directory, and I'll call it uploads. So when we write our save page, that's where any files the user uploads are going to get stored.
Can't we just put it in the database using Word or PLL?
Okay. We'll talk about the database after. Again, I'm glad you're thinking ahead, but one step at a time. We're not dealing with the database yet. We're just dealing with the mechanics of how do we upload a file and get it on the server. That's step one, so we need to walk before we can run. Okay, there's no point thinking about how do we get it in the database when we don't even yet know how to save a file on the server.
Yeah.
So let's do step one first. I appreciate your thinking ahead, but just hold that thought. So we're going to want all our files saved into the uploads folder. Okay, so what I think we're going to do, we're going to take a 10-minute break. When we come back for part two, we'll build the save upload page where we will do all of these things that we've outlined here. Okay, we'll take a break.